The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dibble Institute's free second Wednesday webinar, exploring social poverty, low-income populations, and the impact of family and community ties. I'm Irene Farley, Outreach Specialist with Dibble, and you will also hear from Kathy Guidry, our technical wizard behind the curtain, and who you will also hear or contact when you call our office. Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Irene. Hi, Sarah. It's good to be here.
Great. We're glad you're here. And most importantly, a shout out to our presenter, Dr. Sara Halpern-Meekin. Hi, Sara.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Now some housekeeping tips. For webinar information, if you're unable to access audio through your computer, please use your phone and your computer to see it and your phone for hearing it. All attendees are muted. Type your questions in the question box, not the chat box, but the question box on your control panel. We ask that you do this at the end of the webinar at the Q&A time. We will not have any poll questions during this particular presentation. And really important that this webinar can be shared or reviewed later in our archives at the link right here, Dibble Institute Free Resources Webinars. We invite you also to visit our website, which has been newly modified, and you might find it very interesting and hopefully welcoming. Well, we have so many new people on our webinar today, so I'd like to give you just a brief rundown of who the Dibble Institute is, how we got to be, and so forth. This is Charlie and Helen's picture of Charlie Dibble and Helen Dibble, who are our founders. In the early 90s, when the divorce rate was reaching its peak, Charlie was really concerned about the future of families, and especially of the youth he worked with, as their families' lives shifted. Charlie had an instinctive understanding that family formation was critical to the best outcomes for youth and future family formation. Charlie knew he could not give the youth only anecdotes about what makes up healthy, safe relationships. Young people needed research-based positive youth development skills, such as resiliency, self-regulation, communication skills, and so forth. All that to gain agency in their lives. And this was the beginning of the Dibble Institute, a 501c3 national independent nonprofit. In the last 10 years, we have had 1.5 million students participate in our programs delivered by many organizations, much like yours, in numerous diverse settings and for diverse ages and audiences of students. The next 3 slides explain our key values as an organization. The very first one, key as I mentioned, that Charlie was concerned that everything be research-based, we continue to be big fans of evidence and research, which is critical to our mission. You can be confident that our programs and resources provide up-to-date research. As new research is uncovered, we add it to our programs as timely as possible. And we exist, secondly, because of the value we have in the importance of the creation of healthy, stable, and safe families, which leads to the best outcomes for youth, much like the families pictured here. And finally, we have often been asked about how our programs address LGBTQ youth. Because we as humans are hardwired for relationships, All youth are seeking to connect with others. All relationships are important to our physical and mental health. Therefore, the Dibble Institute is constantly striving to be inclusive and able to speak to as many young people as possible. Again, our goal is to give all young people the skills to be safe and successful in their relationships and navigate into healthy adulthood. With that, I'd love to introduce our speaker today. I'm so proud and happy that she agreed to be our speaker. Dr. Sara Halpern-Meekin is an associate professor in human development and family studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She received her PhD from Harvard University in sociology and social policy. Her research focuses on the instability of families, relationships, and finances, and on the government policies aimed at addressing these experiences of instability, including relationship education programs and income support programs. When Kay Reed, our executive director, made the Dibble staff aware of Sara's book, Social Poverty, all of us saw the nexus of what was put forth in the book to our mission at Dibble Institute. It is my extreme pleasure to present to you Sara Halpern-Meekin. Thank you, Sara.
Thanks, Irene. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my work with you all today, and I hope that this can be the beginning of a conversation that we can continue after this presentation, because I know that there's so much important work that so many of you are doing that really intersects with the research I'm going to be talking about today. Next slide, please, Kathy. I'm going to start off by telling you about one couple who I met in the course of doing my research. This is a couple based in Oklahoma, Ashley, who's 20, and Mark, who's 21. They arrived hand in hand the first time we met. Ashley was 7 months pregnant. She was really engaging, very lively when we talked. She made out faces and acted things out. Mark, on the other hand, had bloodshot eyes, and he was really tired. He works overnight shifts at KFC. But they continued to hold hands throughout the hour or so that we talked. And they told me how they had been friends before their relationship turned romantic. They moved in together after only a month, and Ashley got pregnant, the first child for both of them, just a few months later. Ashley says that she feels more emotionally cared for by Mark than she ever has in any of her previous relationships. She told me, I don't think of him as just a fiance. I think of him as a best friend, and he is. He's my best friend. If I didn't have him, I'd probably be the loneliest person on earth right now. When it comes to social support, Ashley and Mark lean really heavily on each other. They explained to me that they've distanced themselves from their group of friends because they've had a lot of conflict with them since the two of them got together. They say maybe even they want to move to another state to get away from what Mark calls that high school drama. The couple had lived with Mark's mother, but they'd struggled to get along with her and Mark's brothers. So they now live with Ashley's mom, which seems to be working out so far, but neither she nor they want it to be a long-term relationship. So they have these strained relationships with friends and family, but they're not trying to enter parenthood alone. They enrolled in a relationship education program called Family Expectations that teaches couples communication and parenting skills. And when I asked them why they had decided to do that, Mark explained, at least be able to have some type of stability or nearing stability by the time we're done. I knew at that point that they relied just on Mark's $1,000 a month in income. So I said, you mean financial stability? Mark corrected me. Not the case of financial, because with the way kids are nowadays, we're not going to be financially stable for years now, and I know that. But just get to the case where we're not trying to rip each other's heads off, just family stability. Programs like the one that Ashley and Mark were attending, Family Expectations, aim to teach new parents concrete skills for managing conflict in productive ways, with the end goal of having more children raised by their parents who are in a healthy and committed relationship. In a series of group workshops, the couples learn about fighting fair and communicating well. And in this research, I suggest that to understand these programs and the positive views that parents like Ashley and Mark have of them, we need to take seriously their relational, their social needs. Next slide, please. The coverage of these kind of programs has at times been far from positive, as you'll see here. We have from the New Yorker, Catherine Boo asking, is wedlock really a way out of poverty? And Rebecca Rosen declaring in the Atlantic, marriage will not fix poverty. The research findings have been mixed. When we look at a large scale of federally funded randomized controlled trials, the Building Strong Families evaluation focused on unmarried parents and found no significant impacts on participants' relationship quality and stability. The evaluation of the Strengthening Healthy Marriages program, which targeted married parents, found small but significant improvements in couples' happiness, distress, and communication, among other relationship qualities. But couples who'd enrolled in the program were no more likely to be together 2.5 years later than those who didn't. Contrast that, though, with what some of the people I talked to said. Next slide, please. Take Robert, for example, 21 years old, a first-time father, who said, it was like family expectations put a phrase or a word above the problem we had. It was like, this is your problem here. So now we knew how to take what steps we needed to take care of it. So that was definitely building us up stronger each week. Another couple I met, Otis and Danelle, who are in their early 30s, contrasted the atmosphere of the housing project where they lived with that of family expectations. Otis said of their housing complex where we were meeting, if we weren't here, a lot of things would be a lot different. We could get out and laugh and do other things. When you're sitting here, you're stuck in this black cloud. Danelle compared it to the relationship education program, saying, with family expectations, you get peace of mind. You're around good, positive people, nothing negative, nothing. Next slide, please. So as a researcher, this left me with a puzzle. The people I was talking to on the ground were describing enthusiastically their experiences in these programs, but journalists and people doing these large-scale randomized trials were saying these programs weren't great. And so I tried to make sense of this puzzle. Next slide, please. And the answer I found was in what Ashley said. We need to take very seriously when Ashley says, if I didn't have him, I'd probably be the loneliest person on earth right now. Oftentimes we take an economic perspective when we analyze or understand what motivates people to participate in programs, to get or to stay married, to stay in school. We look at the dollars and cents. And I certainly do not deny the importance of financial resources, but in my work here, I want to push us to think more about the relational resources people have and how the desire to pursue or secure these relational resources can be a key source of motivation for so many people. And if we don't take into account the necessity of these relational resources, we might not understand why people do what they do and how government policies and programs will affect them. So in this work, I use the term social poverty as a linguistic counterbalance to our predominant focus on financial poverty. And I define social poverty as lacking dependable friends or family members who provide emotional support and companionship, and to whom you can safely disclose your vulnerabilities. So social poverty operates independently from financial poverty, but lacking resources in either area could increase the risk of experiencing the other. Before I go further, I want to take a step back now and tell you a little bit about the setup of my research. Next slide, please. So I interviewed 31 couples, so 62 parents, multiple times over the course of a year, for a total of 192 interviews. These couples, when I met them, had just enrolled in Family Expectations, and they continued taking part in my interviews whether or not they participated in the program. So many completed all of their workshops and extra activities, and one couple never even went to their first workshop, and everywhere in between. So I heard about all the different experiences people had. More than a third of the couples I met were white, just over a third were interracial couples, and about a quarter were Black. The age of the participants was just under 25 on average, and the average monthly couple income was under $1,500. So none of the couples were married at the start of the study. About 20% were engaged, and another 20% described themselves as having plans to marry but not being formally engaged. They all either had just had a new child together or were just about to have a new child when they enrolled in the program. During the year that I interviewed these couples, more than 1,500 people in the Oklahoma City area participated in Family Expectations. So I can't speak to all of those experiences, but I hope to capture some of them here. Next slide. Many of you may have heard the term social capital before, and a lot of research focuses on that. The social capital literature and research asks about the ties that we have to other people in terms of how those ties can help us access economic resources. Do you know somebody who can give you a job referral or offer you a loan if you're in a pinch, a place to crash if you get evicted? So there's a lot of focus here on these social connections that are convertible into economic resources. That is, we're focusing on the use value of social ties. But at the same time, there's been research showing that people's real relational needs are not being met. So just because somebody gives you a place to crash doesn't mean they're a warm and accepting shoulder to cry on. And why might people's relational needs be unmet? Well, the previous research suggests that these are not flaws in individuals, but rather people's relationships are shaped by a whole host of factors: economic factors, government policy factors, and environmental and cultural factors that can shape the nature of the relationships they experience. Next slide. So why does social poverty matter? It's a lot more than just a matter of hurt feelings when you're lacking adequate relational resources. We know from previous research that social isolation and lacking emotional supports are linked to a whole host of poor health behaviors and poor health outcomes, including an increased risk of morbidity and mortality that's on par in some studies with the risks associated with smoking. So the effect sizes here can be really substantial in some cases. We also know from previous research that emotional supports during pregnancy are associated with a lower risk of postpartum depression and better birth outcomes for mom and baby, and that social support facilitates parenting behaviors and promotes children's development. In short, just as with economic poverty, the effects of social poverty can really reverberate throughout families' lives and impact the well-being of the next generation. Next slide, please. The parents who I met, like Ashley and Mark, are in the middle of a whole flurry of life transitions that can really disrupt their relationships with their friends and family and challenge their ability to create a secure romantic union with one another. So first of all, their pregnancies, as Ashley and Mark's did, often occur early on in their relationships before firm commitments have been made. And that means that they're figuring out these roles of partner and parent all at the same time, which can be a lot to take on. Also, a lot of the parents who I met were quite young, in their early 20s, and so they were still really engaged in the explorations of this stage of life, developing an identity that's independent from their parents, completing their education, pursuing a career, getting some independence in terms of where they live and their income, their ability to pay their bills. All of this exploration can really conflict with the requirements in our culture for being a responsible parent. I'm getting some feedback here, Kathy and Irene. I don't know if you can fix that or if anyone else is hearing it.
Sarah,
Sorry.
yes, I just muted Irene. I think that might have been part of it. So I'm going to mute myself back. So I think it'll be clear
Great,
now.
thank you.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, everyone. So what we expect in our culture from parents is that they put somebody else first. They put this child first. And that really is in conflict with the idea about emerging adulthood that we have in our, where you can explore yourself and what you want to do and not have any responsibilities and not be tied down. And so transitioning to adulthood while you're transitioning to parenthood can put those two roles in conflict with one another. We also know from previous research that there are two main periods in the life course where loneliness and social isolation are most commonly reported. One is the one that gets more attention, and that's during old age. But the other time is during early adulthood, and that gets a lot less attention. So many of these parents are in that period in the life course when they are most highly susceptible to experiencing the sort of social isolation that can give rise to social poverty. The reason that these transitions can create this real risk of social poverty is because when you're going through so many changes, your relationships need to be renegotiated. Who you are, what you're doing, and what responsibilities and engagement you have with your friends and family can change. And so that can tax those relational resources. Further, it's really hard to develop trust in relationships when so much of who you are and what you're doing is up in the air. Because for trust to develop in a relationship, you have to believe that your interests and expectations are aligned with those of your partner. And when you or your partner are unclear of your interests and expectations, getting on the same page there to develop trust can be really difficult. Finally, as I explained earlier, many of these couples I met were living on very limited incomes, and the stresses of being able to not being able to afford the lives that they wanted for themselves and their children, having an income adequate to cover their needs and maybe a few wants was a stressor for many of them. But as Mark, who we met earlier, said, he wants to be able to weather these financial stresses and other stresses without trying to rip each other's heads off. So Ashley and Mark are getting by without phone service, but they don't want to get by without each other. Next, I want to tell you more about the experiences of the young adults that I met in this relationship education program. Next slide, thank you. So I'm going to tell you about a couple, Tiana, who's 20, and Stefan, who's 21. They've been together for the past 4 years. They had broken up about 5 months, for about 5 months, a year or so before I met them. Their relationship just really collapsed under the weight of Tiana's struggles as she was bounced back and forth between her father's house, her grandmother's house, and her foster mom's house. But now they say they're back together and they're stronger than ever. They're looking forward to having their first child together in just a few months. Stefan and Tiana live with his parents, his brother, and his grandmother, and they say they'd really prefer to live on their own. It's stressful to live with his family, but that arrangement does allow the two of them to mostly make ends meet. They split the bills evenly between her wages from working at a daycare center and his hours at a grocery store. These two really pride themselves on being different from everyone else, from how they look and how they dress to how they act. They tell me how they can't wait until their daughter's a teenager and they can morbidly embarrass her in front of her friends by reenacting knight versus dragon sword fights in the living room. They really take a deep comfort in their uniqueness and in their shared differences. Tiana says of Stefan, he's my lifeline. He talks me through everything. My personality completes his and vice versa. A life without him, she says, just doesn't make sense. And in her words, we can hear what an incredible social resource she has in Stefan. And so it's deeply important to her ability to avoid social poverty that they make their relationship last this time around. Given her past growing up, Tiana says it's really hard for her to trust that their relationship will go the distance. She says she's just seen too many people, from her parents to her past boyfriends, walk out on her before. And so as they look ahead to making a family life for their daughter, not repeating the past is a huge motivator. Tiana said, I think we pretty much have a moment every single day when we see his parents together or we talk about my parents and we're like, we're never going to be like that, never. And that's part of what motivates them to come to Family Expectations. When they arrived the first time to tour the facility, one look around sold them on the program. Stefan recalled thinking to himself, you sit in lazy boy recliners and watch a presentation and they feed you? I'm cool. And Tiana laughed. She described her reaction to seeing the facility. Can we move in? They were really motivated to build a strong family for their daughter, but the program's well-appointed spaces and the meals made Family Expectations feel like the right place to try to build this family. And the people really mattered too. Tiana explained, it just seemed like they made things comfortable. I've taken parenting classes before for work, and you're like, man, I don't want to be here. But they made it feel really comfortable. When we first came in, they were showing us everything, and he was talking to us like he'd known us all our lives. So even though this is a pair who really prides themselves on being social outsiders, feeling accepted and welcomed and comfortable in a space was such a draw. When I first met them, they had attended the first workshop meeting, and Stefan was really enjoying himself. He said, it's real fun. It's able to get a couple out away from the hustle and bustle of life, away from their kids. It gets them secluded so they feel safe and away from all the stresses, able to just let go, even if it's just for an hour and a half. It's nice to just spend that time alone. And by alone, he means together with his partner. Tiana says she doesn't want to just escape stress. She hopes that Family Expectations will help her learn to cope with it too, especially because they're about to be parents. She said, something as small as a spilled glass of milk is like catastrophic to me when I'm stressed out. So learning how to deal with stress and how to be good with the baby is what's important to me right now, because I'm not functional when I'm stressed out. Tiana knows that life is going to offer a lot more spilled glasses of milk. And so she's banking on Family Expectations to provide them some tools so that those don't become catastrophes. As I heard about Stefan, Tiana, and all the other couples' experiences, I could understand why they were interested in attending Family Expectations in the first place. There were a lot of sources of ambiguity in their lives, and so they were searching for a much firmer relational foundation for their families, especially as they were welcoming these new babies. Couples see Family Expectations as offering the possibility for laying this foundation. The program resonated with parents, and their experiences in the program, from the physical environment to the staff to the social atmosphere, was quite positive. So couples participated extensively in the services the program offered and benefited financially from the incentives and participation supports that it had available. Couples had this opportunity, as Stefan said, to have a date night away from the stresses of home and parenting. And they also had the opportunity to form relationships through their interactions with staff and peers, to have the social resources that the program offered while they were working on building their social resources within their own relationship. The question, though, remained whether all of these positive experiences and special time together would create real change in couples' relationships and build their social resources in the long term. Next slide. 3 months after I first interviewed the couples at the start of Family Expectations, I returned to meet them again to find out about their experiences in the workshops. I'm going to tell you about another couple who I met during that time. Brianna was 18 and her boyfriend Zach was 20. They were living with Zach's mom. They were having their first child together. When they had started family expectations, their arguments often ended in Brianna shutting down emotionally and refusing to talk, or Zach going out to smoke or walk around or hang out with his best friend. After their time in their workshops, they were still responding to conflict in these ways. But to take this to mean that nothing had changed in their relationships would be a mistake, because they now labeled these behaviors as their ways of taking a time out. And even though it still annoyed the other when one of them did it, they both thought it was useful to helping them deal with conflict. Brianna said, at family expectations, they said, when you get so angry, take a time out. So I just let him walk away and calm down, and I give him a few minutes and then go talk to him, or he comes and talks to me. So family expectations didn't teach them to take time outs. They already were, but the workshop taught them to label the behaviors they were already engaging in as timeouts. And the result is that rather than deriding one another for each of their different ways of managing conflict, they came to view their actions as a positive way of dealing with arguments. So establishing this norm, timeouts are a way to take a break and cool down during a conflict, and that doing so is beneficial, really transformed the way they understood one another's behavior. So rather than undermining their relationship, their ways of managing conflict came to be a way that helped their union. Another way that the workshops helped couples to establish shared expectations and norms for their relationships was by showing them through the group workshop setting that conflict and struggle were common and a part of every relationship and not a reason to break up. So easing social poverty by offering a community of families who are going through a similar transition meant that the program was providing couples with a framework to better understand their relationships. Abby, who was 22, said, it was exciting to see a lot of other people going through the same things we were and to get feedback from them. Oh, I never looked at it that way. So it was just neat, she said. So during the first round of interviews, when I first met them, couples were reported that they were interested in taking part in family expectations because they were having some relationship problems, often around communication. So they usually weren't showing up to further strengthen an already really strong relationship, but rather to address some existing problems that they were having trouble figuring out on their own. And for most couples, the program ended up feeling like a successful response to the needs they brought into it. So the changes that parents described seemed to represent to them that they were starting to move their relationships in the right direction. The workshops didn't fix all the problems they faced, but they offered tools where couples felt like they could begin to work on their issues. Next slide, please. So by the last time I met parents, about a year or so after they'd enrolled, taking part in family expectations wasn't a regular part of life for most parents anymore. But many believe that the program's impacts really still reverberated in their relationships and in their parenting. Some did struggle to implement what they learned. They were inhibited by issues ranging from mental health and trauma to deep financial needs, and a few had broken up. But most still saw their unions as a work in progress and continued to find value in the lessons they had learned during their time in their workshops. One couple, Elise and Robert, were in their early 20s and had had their first child. Before the program, they said Robert would brush aside issues Elise raised when they weren't important to him. And as a result of participating in family expectations, they said that Robert started taking Elise's concerns more seriously. And Elise began to see how approaching their arguments differently might get her more of the reaction that she was wanting. She said that before family expectations, when they got into a disagreement, she basically didn't care how Robert was feeling. She said, I wanted to talk about it. I just wanted to get it over and done with so I can get everything off my chest so I can feel better. I would follow him down the stairs, like, what's going on? Why are you mad at me? So when we went to that lesson on the Dodger chaser dynamic and timeout, he's like, you do that. I said, oh yeah, I do that. I still have to catch myself though, because I still do it, Elise admitted with a laugh. I asked her how it felt now when Robert left to take a walk when things got heated. And she said, I feel a whole lot better. This still kind of bothers me, but it helps a lot. Try to remember, okay, I'll just stay here and he'll go there and come back. And so by having labels for their behaviors, they were better able to understand the dynamics in their relationship and feel better about their ability to manage those dynamics. Elise said, it helped strengthen your relationship. It made us a whole lot better because we probably wouldn't even be together right now if it weren't for family expectations, because we were having some pretty bad problems when we enrolled. And Robert joked, our relationship was getting dragged through the mud. Then after family expectations, we graduated from that and started dragging ourselves through the dirt. So he's joking here, right? But the point is clear. They were advancing. They were moving in the direction they wanted. Things weren't perfect, but they were getting better, and they had hope that their relationship could continue improving. This really is a testimony, I think, to the complex ways in which family expectations worked to affect couples' relationships. So they learned concrete conflict management techniques like timeout, but they also learned to recognize negative behavior patterns like the Dodger-chaser dynamic in their relationship. And it didn't solve their problems, but it gave them tools to manage them and to feel more hopeful that they could continue parenting together and raise their child in the healthy sort of family environment that they wanted. Next slide, please. So how did parents see family expectations as building their relational resources? The program did this in a number of ways from the parent's perspective. Although it certainly was not an overtly identified goal, the Family Expectations program really does establish expectations. It creates an environment of clear norms for how partners are meant to behave in their romantic and parenting relationship. Couples would come in with questions that they were wondering about, like what's a healthy way to argue? Is yelling off limits? Is name calling okay? And during their workshops and their private meetings, couples would work on skills to address that, would be presented with an understanding of healthy relationships, and would also work on setting personal and family goals to make sure they were on the same page about what they were working toward. So it made couples feel like they were gaining tools and making plans as a team and moving in the right direction. Couples also described being treated in a consistently positive and respectful way by all members of the staff, which itself is a short-term form of social support. So the couples who I met came to Family Expectations because their lives were profoundly unstable, and they were negotiating a lot of difficult transitions to adulthood, to partnership, to parenthood, all at the same time. And they felt they needed help in accomplishing those tasks. The resources at their disposal through their personal lives, their families, or their communities didn't feel adequate to secure the family lives that they desired. And for them, Family Expectations seemed to be a reasonable response to their needs in the relationship realm. The program's lessons aligned with the skills and norms that couples wanted to develop in their own unions. For others, Family Expectations wasn't enough on its own to meet their many needs. Those needs are inextricably intertwined with how their relationships unfold. So fully addressing mental health issues, felony records, painful and traumatic family histories, a lack of transportation, the need for stable housing, the need for employment with some kind of upward mobility were outside the scope of the program. And that limited the program's ability to set some couples firmly on a path toward the more positive family life they wanted. In the time since I met with parents, the program has given thought to how they can support parents in some of these areas, but I think it remains a challenge, not just for this program, but for many to work on. Next slide, please. So here are some takeaways that I hope are useful food for thought for people who are in the relationship education field. First, relationship education should be incorporated with services that address other needs, whether those are economic, educational, or health related. And this can really help to tackle all those various transitions and sources of instability parents are facing. Relationship education could serve as a point of entry for these other services, or those other services could serve as a point of entry for relationship education. To do this means building local coalitions of service providers who can combine resources or even co-locate to make it easier for parents to access multiple services. Further, I hope that a social poverty perspective can inform the development of these services. And that means paying attention to participants' interactions with staff, even ones that might seem unimportant. How they're recruited, the timeliness of returning a phone call or an email, issues of staff turnover. All of those communicate messages to parents about whether or not they have somebody who's in their corner, who respects them, who cares about them, who notices if they don't show up for a class. And that can really shape their buy-in to the program and the extent to which they're building social resources through their relationships with program staff. Second, I think practitioners and curriculum developers really need to be prepared to serve diverse families. A key aspect of what I was seeing in parents' enthusiasm for the program was their acceptance in that program. They were all having children outside of marriage. Some of those relationships ended, leaving the women participating in the program by themselves, and yet they felt accepted and supported. We know from previous research that a key aspect of the working alliance between program staff and participants comes from these feelings of being accepted and understood. And so normative or judgmental messages could really interfere with creating the relationships that are necessary for the program to realize its impact. Third, it would be ideal to perhaps reach individuals before they're pregnant or have children, and maybe even before they're struggling in difficult relationships. So continuing to work to reach young people in high school or higher education settings could be appropriate. The effects of relationship education with teens have been modest, but consistently positive. And so we can look to those points of education in relationship education classes and sex education classes as places where we can help young people start developing the sorts of tools that they need to navigate their relationships as they move forward. Next slide, please. I want to end by sharing a story about one other couple, Lauren, who's 23, and Cordell, who's 21. Lauren is enrolled in college and is trying to finish up while they've just had their first child. She said, I just don't think it's an easy path to be on, having a kid, trying to make a relationship work. I asked her what would be in place in an ideal world when somebody had a child, and she started laughing. $200,000 in the bank, a home, what private school you want them to attend. She knew these were outlandish standards given what's possible. And so she continued, but seriously, money in the bank and a strong marriage. You'll still have stresses in life, but you'll have that center you can come to and just be at peace with, knowing that you have money in the bank and a family that loves you. And they certainly haven't reached that financial ideal yet, but Cordell says of their son, my baby loves that me and my girl are together. You can tell just by how he smiles. So Lauren and Cordell are seeking to ensure not just their son's financial future, but his relational future as well by protecting him from social poverty. I'm going to end it there. I really look forward to the questions you all have during Q&A. And if there are things that we're not able to get to, I certainly encourage you to contact me by email, and I'm really happy to continue the conversation there.
Unmuted.
Well, thank you so much, Sara. And first of all, before I even get into this, my apologies. I introduced you as Sara Halpern-Meekin, but it's Sara Halpern-Meekin. So my sincere apologies in that. I would now like to invite all participants to enter any questions in the question box that you may have. And I'm just going to allow a minute for you to do that. And we will answer these as time allows. If they are unanswered, we will get back to you because we will have your questions written down on our side of things and get back to you. So thank you for putting those questions in. Okay, so we have a few questions here, Sarah.
Great, great.
Let's see here. Can Sarah, can you repeat your definition of social poverty? A little bit, I think there's someone needing a little bit more clarity in that.
Sure. So I define social poverty. I'm sorry, I'm hearing the feedback again. I don't know if everyone else can hear that. So I define social poverty as lacking dependable friends or family who provide emotional support and companionship, and to whom you can safely disclose your vulnerabilities. So people you can trust to be there for you, to have your back. So it's not a matter of talking to people a certain number of times or having a certain number of friends. Different people are going to have different types of social needs, and so this is subjective. Just as our bodies have different caloric needs, our socio-emotional selves can have different social needs. And so for some people, having a few close relationships might be enough for them to feel fulfilled and okay. And for other people, there might be a more extensive network that they need, or more intensive relationships that they need to feel like their social needs are being met. Irene, did you have other questions?
Well, it looks like we may have lost Irene, maybe. Irene?
I'm back. I did. Thanks, Kathy. Sorry about that. Let me get to the next question. And Edward Dick says, there's a lot to like in this approach. How would you measure success? Is this integrated with screens for adverse childhood experiences, social needs, etc.?
So we can certainly think about ways to measure this. One way is that we can measure people's feelings of social isolation, and there are some existing measures out there that I can point people toward, offline, of people's feelings of social isolation and sort of social disconnection. So we can certainly be doing those things. And then I think also other ways of assessing people's connection with the program, how they feel about staff, how they feel about others in their group if programming is being delivered in a group setting, can give you at least a short-term sense of whether some of those short-term relational resources are being built in that setting. Are people feeling respected, understood, warmly received? Those sorts of things are going to give us a sense of whether the program is building relational resources.
Thanks for that answer. And I have another question from Megan ONeil, who is trying to get a clarity of how does social poverty provide a way out of financial poverty? Is there a connection there?
So there is a connection between social poverty and financial poverty, insofar as we know that social isolation can be more common among people who are at the lowest end and the highest end of the income threshold. So interestingly, you hear stories about feeling socially isolated, or what I would call socially poor, among like celebrities and the ultra rich, because they don't feel like they can trust anyone either. So there can be elements of your financial situation that can contribute to your likelihood of experiencing social poverty, but we know it's not just a function of the amount of money that you have. And having social ties can help or hurt your financial situation. For example, having somebody to borrow money from, or having people ask to borrow money from you, can affect your financial situation. But just having those people does not mean that your social needs are necessarily being met. We know, for example, that people who are in some intense relationships of giving and receiving financial support often report that those relationships are strained and challenging. And so those are not necessarily places where their social and emotional needs are being met, even if it's helping to meet their financial needs. So these things are connected, but really not one and the same, and not just a function of one another.
Thank you, Sara. And we have quite a few questions that are similar, but here is one that I think is important. Are there any suggestions for training staff to be ready for a diverse range of clients?
So I think helping excuse me, not families, but staff to understand the background and experiences of the people that they're serving is really important. You can do that in part from how you hire in the first place, right? Are you hiring people from the communities you're looking to serve? People can even be hired out of previous program participants in some cases. And so that can help ensure that the perspective of people who you're hoping to support and reach is a daily presence in your staff. I think also just making sure that people are exposed to ongoing training and support, so that learning doesn't stop or is not a requirement to get hired and then stops once people start their jobs. So they're getting ongoing exposure to different perspectives and experiences. And then finally, having managers who are tuned to these issues, so that it's part of what staff are expected to achieve, that they are expected to be responsive to and supportive of and respectful of all manner of people who walk through the door, regardless of what walk of life they're from.
Getting the right people on the bus in the right places. Here's, I think, a really relevant question of today's way of people connecting to each other. Are the families that you spoke to connected via social media? And does social media support some of the social poverty that you speak of?
So I was doing this research a few years back when the social media landscape was different. So people certainly would be connected on Facebook or something like that, but that, being connected to somebody on Facebook is really not the same as having an offline real life relationship with that person. And that's borne out in some of the research that we see more recently. There are actually higher rates of feelings of social isolation and depression among the heaviest social media users. That's not to say that social media causes that. The causal arrow certainly could go the other way from people who are feeling depressed or isolated, looking for connection on social media, but it doesn't seem to be the answer. So if the be all and end all of your social engagements happens on social media, it seems like that's unlikely to fully meet your relational needs. And so having those relationships exist in real life, offline, and through personal connections is also going to be a key part of meeting those relational needs. So if the social media platforms are a way to facilitate those relationships as opposed to the entirety of those relationships, they could be helpful.
Thank you so much for that. It really has changed so much over the last year even. Is a focus on long-term financial goals versus short-terms, saving for college, as opposed to purchasing baby items, an issue with these people, with the people you worked with?
So most of the folks I was talking to were not in a position where they were able to save for college or able to purchase many new baby items. So many of the people I'm talking to in this research are living below the poverty line, if not below the deep poverty line, that is below 50% of the poverty line. So they're living on so little that making ends meet to meet basic needs is a challenge for many of them. So there's not a thought of saving for college. And I would not personally recommend that that be their first priority, making sure that they have a safe place for their children to live, that they have clothing and food, transportation, in a city that doesn't have great public transportation. All of those things are going to be primary needs that receive priority over saving for college. The families did enjoy the fact that the program offered them the opportunity through its on-site store, I say in air quotes, to buy new baby items. So they really liked the opportunity to do that. That was one of the participation incentives that was offered. And so that was one of the places where parents could help to meet their children's needs. And so, parents shared stories like having a baby who's born a preemie and them not having, the seat for a preemie to sleep in propped up and being able to buy that in the on-site store. So it certainly was a really important way of meeting some of the immediate demands of parenting through that financial support that the program provided.
Okay, and one last question, given the time that we have left. Your workshops that you described in your presentation here worked with primarily couples that were together. But so often in poverty and in young couples, really young, that couples are no longer together. Is there any difference in programming versus the ones for married or couples together that are provided or should be provided for single, not married couples or parents?
So all of the couples who I talked to were unmarried at the start of the program. They wanted to make their relationships last, and many of them did. Some of them got married, some of them remained together without getting married, and a few did break up. This is pretty representative of the experiences of low-income unmarried parents when they have a baby. Most are together in a romantic relationship at the time that the baby is born. And those relationships do often break up. Many do stay together, some getting married and some remaining in a stable cohabiting relationship. But there certainly are particular needs and challenges that are going to come if parents are going to continue co-parenting after their romantic relationship has ended. There's another program that shares space with family expectations. It's called True Dads, and it seeks to serve just the sort of parents that the person who asked this question is referring to. So it recruits fathers and anyone who they co-parent with. And so that could be a current romantic partner, it could be an ex, it could be a family member or friend who helps dad to co-parent, who helps dad to parent. And so the idea there is not that we just want to tell dads to parent, but we want parents, all the adults who are involved in making parenting happen for a child, to be learning how to work together, because many of those communication skills and ways of having healthy interactions that are taught in family expectations are important across all relationships. They're not unique to our romantic relationships. Learning how to share needs in a respectful way, learning how to deal with conflict in a healthy and respectful way. Those things cut across relationships. And so many of these same issues are going to be important regardless of whether we're talking to people who are in a romantic relationship or not. There are certainly additional challenges for people who are co-parenting.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that was the last question we can address right now. So I want to be sure to remind you that this webinar will be available in 3 business days, and you can find that at the address right here, the link to our webinars. We invite you to stay in touch with us. You will be subscribed to our newsletter, or you'll get that and you can actually unsubscribe yourself if it isn't relevant to your needs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. Our phone number, 800-695-7975. And finally, next month's webinar is an update on the Mind Matters evaluation. Mind Matters is a curriculum that deals directly with building resilience after adversity and trauma, with skills to address trauma for young people. So again, our thanks to Sara for presenting such an excellent presentation today. And we will get back to all those who we could not address their question today. Be assured of that. Any ending responses, Kathy? Do you have anything more to say?
No, I just thank you so much, Sara, for being on our webinar. It was very informational, and I appreciate everyone that's been here today, and we will be in touch with you. Y'all have a great evening.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Goodbye.